How many here in the room and even online were born somewhere other than Australia? Just your hands up. I was. If you're online, put a little hand up emoji or put a little comment in there. All right, so keep your hands up if you're born outside of Australia. And those that have their hands down, no, keep your hand up. Those that have their hands down, how many of you, the people with their hands down, have a parent that was born overseas? So a few actually. Have a look around. There's quite a few people, isn't there? I'd say more than half in the room. I don't know how many there are online, but that's pretty impressive that there's an overwhelming majority of people are either born overseas themselves or their parents or one of their parents are born overseas. And really, apart from the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, the rest of us have at some point come from another land because they're the only people that are truly born here in this land and their ancestry has. At some point we've come maybe as convicts or, right back in the beginning, or we've migrated great-great-great-great-grandparents back. So given that we have a really prominent non-Australian history, why is there such reservation and prejudice towards people from other backgrounds still? I think we've come a long way. I think we've become better than we have, but there's still a lot of unknown and prejudice against people that have come from overseas or come from other backgrounds. And we get quite opinionated sometimes as a nation towards foreigners and people coming into Australia. And some people get quite possessive over this land of Australia, and it's like, no, we don't want to share it. They've come from outside. This is for us that are staying here. And I'm not quite sure why, because as Christians, all our land, all our creation belongs to God. So why wouldn't we want to share it with other people? I wonder how many Australians have listened to the second verse of our national anthem, and in particular the line that says, "For those who've come across the seas, we've boundless plains to share." Hang on. But not in my backyard, please. No, they've too many of them. Stop them. They can't come in. And then we have the song, "I Am Australian." We are one, but we are many, and from all the lands on earth we come. We'll share a dream, as long as it's my dream, and sing with one voice. I am, we are, you are, we are Australian. It's interesting how sometimes we sing these songs, but the attitudes and opinions don't necessarily fit what we're singing. We tend to have our own ideas of what life should be like, what our country should be like. We want it all to look like we look. And as I said, Christians, we believe that creation belongs to God, so there should be less reason for us to be so possessive about our nation, as it really doesn't belong to us anyway. It belongs to God. He just puts us here for a time as a caretaker to look after the land and to be inhabitants. We are the foreigners in God's land. We are all foreigners. Imagine if God were to treat us in the same manner that sometimes we do to other people or other foreigners. Luckily, God treats us with grace and he welcomes us. Perhaps we can learn a few lessons from God about how we can treat others, particularly those from overseas. So today marks, as I said, the start of Refugee Week for 2022. And tomorrow, which is the 20th of June, is actually World Refugee Day. So it's a day and a week to celebrate and bring awareness of the concerns and the needs of people that are refugees. It's also to celebrate the contribution that refugees bring to our countries and to our nations around the world. But I believe that the term refugee is sometimes misunderstood, not just in our nation, but in general. And sometimes there's much debate about refugees in our context. But the term refugee is used commonly to refer to people who are forced to leave their homes for many reasons, including conflict and violence. Sometimes it's also used to refer to a person who's maybe been displaced due to a natural disaster or an environmental damage. And we also hear other terms. We might hear the term asylum seeker or the migrant or immigrant or displaced persons or stateless persons. But a person who's seeking asylum is a person who is seeking protection as a refugee, but is still waiting to have their claim assessed. So every refugee at one point was seeking asylum. So it's like the asylum seeker is the first stage, and then once their claim is assessed, they become a refugee. So people seeking asylum and refugees are people who are forced to flee their country and cannot return unless the situation that forced them to leave improves. Some are forced to flee without any warning, and many have experienced torture or trauma. And most recently, we've obviously heard about the war in Ukraine, and we hear about people being displaced from their homes due to the war. War is just one of the reasons that leads to someone to maybe become a refugee. Majority of refugees actually flee to neighbouring countries, so they cross physically by walking or by other transport to other neighbouring countries from their homeland. And many of these nations are actually developing nations. So they're nations without resources, nations without infrastructure and things that we take for granted here in Australia. And it's actually developing countries host the vast majority of refugees worldwide. It's actually 86% of refugees are in developing countries. So you would think, hang on, why isn't all the countries with the money and the resources taking in the majority of the refugees? A good question to ask. And at the end of 2020, so the data is a little bit old that I've got, there were 82.4 million people who'd been forcefully displaced from their home. That's a lot of people. 82.4 million. Of these, around 48 million were displaced within their own country. So they're actually not technically considered refugees because they're still in their homeland, they're still in their country, but they're still not in their homes. They've had to move north, south, out of their immediate areas for various reasons. And only 26.4 million are actual refugees that have gone to another country. So 1 in every 95 people on this earth have fled their home. You think, how many people have we got in here in this room today? Probably just about 50. So if we doubled the amount of people, that would mean that one person in this room, if we had 100 people here, would have had to flee their home. That's pretty astounding statistics when you think in terms of your community. So even here in Bunbury, there would be a significant number of people that have had to fled their home. If you think about it in our state, that's a lot. In our nation, that's... And worldwide, that's a lot of people that have had to flee their home. Within Australia, there is a huge assumption that many refugees and asylum seekers actually come by boat. And there was a huge media kind of campaign politically that was stop the boats, like as if there was people coming every 5 minutes on a boat. And the rhetoric that was talking that they're coming illegally. They're illegally coming into our country. In fact, the statistics show that most people who seek asylum come to Australia by air. The very few percent actually come by boat. Most come in a plane, and they come to our country. And between 70 and 100%, so, probably at least an average of 80%, who arrive in Australia by boat are found to be legitimate refugees. But yet we would listen to the media and think that everybody coming by boat is illegal and they're coming in and they have no right to come, and that they're just coming on a boat thinking they're going to get a great life in Australia. And there's, the media will say that people are coming and they're jumping the queue and they're coming into Australia just to get a better life. Well, there's actually no queue for refugees. Like, if you're having to flee your home, you're not going to be waiting around 3 weeks while, someone's persecuting you and you might lose your life. There's no queue to sit in that you can wait. It's not like getting a donut that, you wait at a shop and you get in the queue. There is no queue. If you are in threat of your life, you need to leave now. And majority of the people who are coming by boat are fleeing persecution and have had to leave quickly. They've not even had time to maybe collect their belongings, to say goodbye to loved ones, to get documents. They've had to leave in fear of their life at a moment's notice. Seeking asylum is not illegal. And the United Nations has put that in with the Human Rights Convention, that there's a refugee convention. Seeking asylum is a legal human right. If you're being persecuted and you are not safe where you are, you have the right to seek asylum. Australia has signed this refugee convention and are obliged and have agreed and considered the claims of refugee people. And they've agreed to take on 13,750 places per year for refugees. Unfortunately, this is only that small fraction of those millions of people that we see worldwide that needing that safe refuge. And it's quite interesting that even though people seeking asylum, they are entitled to that, that's a right to seek asylum. But in Australia, if they're escaping persecution, we still lock them up in places like Nauru. And sometimes up to 9 years they can be incarcerated for. Because there's no time limit to their detention. And people are treated like a criminal. They're locked up and told, sorry, you're here, and treated like a criminal. And some of these people have gone through traumatic stuff already. They've, maybe experienced torture, maybe persecution. Their lives have been in jeopardy. And then we stick them in a jail and we tell them, you will have to stay here until we can work out if you're legitimate. And they're not even told how long they're going to be in there. Even the criminals we lock up in our prisons within Australia know how long their sentence is. And they know that they're there because they've done something wrong. Refugees arrive into our country and are deported to places and indefinitely told, stay here until we figure out if you're real or not. And they live in substandard conditions for months and even years before they will find out if their case is actually allowed to be given refugee status. And some that, might come into Australia, they might be settled here in Australia, but until their case is heard, they're not given any government benefits, they're not given any work rights, so they're brought into the country and have to rely on community organisations and welfare to live. And even when they're given that refugee status, after many, many years of processing, some of them are only given temporary statuses so that they have to keep reapplying every 3 or 5 years to keep proving that they can stay in this country. It seems like a really unfair and unwelcoming process. And yet we still have a lot of opinions about refugees that are unfounded, lots of myths that we have. We think they're illegal immigrants. We think they are stealing all our jobs. They're not even given work rights. Some of them have to beg for food. We think they're coming just to sponge off our government benefits. Well, it can take them years and years and years before they even get a refugee status, before they can even get a benefit. When in fact, so many of these myths are untrue. They are people in genuine fear for their lives, escaping their homeland, having to leave everything they know in the hope of finding safety. Now, in the Bible, you won't find this word refugee, but as Sam said in his story, did you realise that Jesus was a refugee? When he was a baby, when he was born, the king at the time, King Herod, was threatened because, he had heard that this king of the Jews had been born. And so, being a king and having a big ego, he didn't want anyone threatening his kingship. And so King Herod ordered that all the baby boys 2 and under would be slaughtered, all the Hebrew babies. And so Jesus' life was being threatened. And so Mary and Joseph, in a dream, God came to them and said, you need to get out. You need to flee your homeland. You need to go away until it is safe for you to return. And they moved to a whole new country. They moved to Egypt. And so Jesus and his mum and dad had to stay in Egypt until King Herod died, until the threat was gone before he could return home. So Jesus himself was a refugee. Jesus himself, had his life threatened. And they wouldn't have had time to even say goodbye to family. They wouldn't have had time to collect all their worldly stuff. They would have just had to go quickly because they couldn't risk Herod getting hold of Jesus. But even though we don't see the word refugee in the Bible, God has a lot to say about foreigners and people from other lands. And in the Bible, he uses terms like sojourners, aliens, not aliens, aliens meaning someone from another land, strangers, and even the Common English Bible actually uses the words immigrants. So today we use those sorts of terms like immigrants, but we might use displaced persons, refugees, migrants, asylum seekers, stateless persons, or even visitors. God has a lot to say about how we should interact and treat people that are from other lands. And I want to show you 3 particular references that come from the book of Leviticus. And Leviticus is a book that contains many of the laws that the Israelite people, the people of God, that God required them to live by. So it was a book of, how do I live correctly? And so God has instituted lots of these things to help guide people's way of living. And so I want to look at the book of Leviticus and 3 scriptures in there that talk about how the people of God were to interact and how they were to live with people from other lands. And so the version that I've got is the contemporary English version, and it uses the word foreigner, just so that it's an easier word for us to understand. So the first scripture comes from Leviticus 19, verses 33 to 34. And it says, don't mistreat any foreigners who live in your land. Instead, treat them as well as you treat citizens, and love them as much as you love yourself. Remember, you were once foreigners in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. So God is instructing people to treat foreigners with love. I wonder if we were mistreating any of our foreigners in our land. How is God looking upon that? Is he thinking that we are doing that command? Are we treating them with love? The same love that we give to our family and our friends and fellow Australians. Our next scripture from Leviticus is chapter 23, verse 22. And it's talking about harvest time. And it says, when you harvest your grain, always leave some of it standing around the edges of your fields, and don't pick up what falls on the ground. Leave it for the poor and for the foreigners who live among you. I am the Lord your God. God is reminding them who he is. I am the Lord your God, he says in both those passages, like as if they need reminding. He's saying who he is, that he's worthy of worship, that he owns all these things anyway. And so he's talking about harvest. But now I don't know too many people here are farmers. Anyone a farmer or a current farmer? Maybe a previous farmer? Previous farmer. Did you own your own land? No. Yes, some people did. That was their livelihood. That's how they earned their money. That's how they earned their living, is they had, their own land, they grew their own crops. That was how they got what they needed. But God is telling them, don't just keep it all for yourself. Allow those that are in your community that need it, the poor and the foreigners. Because in those times, people didn't move to other lands unless there was a need. It's not like today where we move, migrants might choose to move to another country and go, yay, I really want to go live in America for a few years because I think it would be great and I get some experience. Back then, people didn't just choose to move. They moved because there's probably a famine in their land and there's no food there. So out of necessity, they moved to a new land. People didn't cross borders to go for a holiday back then. That's quite a new sort of concept. People moved out of necessity. So if foreigners were in your land, there was some issue. Maybe there was conflict. Maybe there was famine. Maybe there was something that had caused them. They could not be in their own homeland. So they were probably people in need. And God is putting in this institution of a welfare system way back in that time where you take what you need but leave the rest for somebody else. Now today we might not have crops. We might have a job, we might get income from other sources. That, God is still saying to us today, yes, have what you need, but what are you doing with the bits, the extra parts? What are you doing with the bits that are left over? What are you doing to help those in your community that don't have what you have? God is still using that principle for us to instruct to provide for foreigners. As a nation, are we providing for foreigners in our land? In some cases, yes, but in a lot of cases, not very well. Are we sharing what we have with those that don't have? That's what God is bringing to us in this passage. And the third one from Leviticus is in chapter 24, verse 22. And this one, he's starting with who he is. He says, I am the Lord your God, and I demand equal justice both for you Israelites and for those foreigners who live among you. So God is saying, we should all be equal. And I want equal justice. I want people to have equal standing in the legal system, equal rights to things. He's instructing people to treat everyone with the same standards. Are we providing justice for refugees that we're locking up in detention centres when they haven't committed a crime? To me, that seems like we're a bit out of whack. Are we providing justice for asylum seekers by not giving them work rights or financial benefits to survive? That people are having to beg for food and resources? God's standard of care for foreigners is far greater than what the world has for their standard of care. God values all life and invites us to extend the same love and care to others that he has for us. God has shown us love and grace and mercy and provision. He wants us to share that same love and provision to others. Because after all, we are all foreigners in God's land. We all at one stage were outsiders in God's family. At some point we, were outside of his kingdom, and he has graciously accepted and welcomed us into his family to become part of his kingdom. Through Jesus' life, he spoke about loving our neighbour, and he invited and welcomed in the strangers and taught others to do the same. Jesus encouraged us to be hospitable to all people regardless of race, gender, background or status. Who knows the story of the Good Samaritan? Anyone heard the Good Samaritan story? Do you know who the hero in the story is? The Samaritan. That's right. The Samaritan was a foreigner. So Jesus is showing that, we treat foreigners badly, but actually they can be the hero in the story. They're the ones that might not be part of our people or our families or our communities. They can bring so much more into our lives and into our stories. The first of the Leviticus passages that we read, God reminds the people that they were once foreigners themselves. And so the people of God were in a land, they were in Egypt, and they were actually slaves to Pharaoh, the leader. And so God is reminding them of how he had brought them out of that situation. He'd taken them out of persecution, he'd taken them out of slavery, He brought them to a land that could be theirs. He brought to the promised land. And just as many of us here today are foreigners, we might have come from many lands and our family backgrounds come from overseas. We need to remember that God has welcomed us in and to do the same for others. The book of Ephesians, which is in the New Testament now, so a lot of these things I've read from the Old Testament, and you might think, oh, well, the Old Testament's old stuff. We don't need to read that anymore. That's before Jesus. But I want to read to you from Ephesians. It's chapter 2, verse 19. It says, "Consequently, you are no longer foreigners and strangers, but fellow citizens with God's people and also members of his household." So God does not consider us foreigners anymore. We were all foreigners because anyone of Jewish heritage? No. So we're all Gentiles. And we're all welcomed into God's family because God's people was originally the Israelite people, the Jewish nation, the Hebrew people. And so us as Gentiles, we've all been brought into that family. We've all been welcomed in. We were those foreigners and we've all been welcomed in by God. He's brought us into his family. So God no longer sees us as those foreigners and strangers, but considered us part of his family. So what can we do as God's people to ensure that we treat foreigners with the same love and acceptance that he has for us? Perhaps we need to rid ourselves of unhelpful myths around refugees and asylum seekers. Perhaps we need to take time to listen to the stories of people who have come from overseas and hear their journey. Perhaps we can get rid of our prejudices and our biases that we might have towards people of other backgrounds. Perhaps we can go out of our way to learn something about someone from an ethnic background. Maybe hear about their culture. Maybe learn a word or two in their language. Maybe it's simply making an effort to say hello and have a conversation with someone that has a different background to us. I'm going to show you a video in a moment for those that want to take it to the next level, that really want to kind of embrace people from other nations, embrace people that might be different to us. There is something called the Welcome Project, and it's looking for Salvationists around the nation to welcome and to be a friend to someone who's new to our country. Maybe it's a new migrant, maybe it's a refugee, maybe it's somebody who just doesn't have family here. It's a great opportunity for all Salvos to engage in our mission for those who are new to Australia and maybe they're searching for connection. And all the requirements is that you need a love for God and a love for people. And I'd like to think that most of you have that love for God and love for people. So we're going to have a look at a video about what the Welcome Project is like. And then there's going to be a link we're going to put up. And we'll put it up on our Facebook page as well for anybody that wants to click in and register for this project as well. So have a look at the screen.
I'm Catherine.
I'm Mila. And this is our story.
People seeking asylum, people on temporary visas, and some new migrants face many challenges when settling in Australia. So when I heard about the Welcome Project, I signed up to be a welcomer immediately. It's a great initiative aimed at tackling isolation and the lack of social support by merely offering friendship and a sense of belonging. By partnering with the local core and doorways, the Welcome Project makes it easy and simple to connect to new migrants in our local area. They were able to connect me with a lovely woman named Mila.
I am originally from Kenya. My life was a very happy and blessed life with my family. I got in a long-distance relationship. We got engaged and then married in 2007. My husband lived in Australia, and I was grateful to God I was able to join him on a family relationship temporary visa. But it became really difficult for me. I was new to the country, newly married, and it didn't take long until I found out I was going to have a child. I didn't know anyone. The only person I knew was my husband. But things did not go well in our marriage. I was afraid for my safety and for my child's safety. Our separation and divorce changed my visa conditions and living situation. I felt a bit stuck on a bridge. I could not go back home, and I did not have a support system here, except through the Salvation Army.
With permission from Mila, the Welcome Project coordinator passed her phone number to me. I introduced myself and said I'm from the local Salvation Army. I asked how she was, and we shared stories of our family, our work, and how we were both doing at the time.
Speaking to Catherine, it was so reassuring, so calming, so lovely. I said to myself, who is this person who has so much love? This person doesn't judge me. I shared with Catherine my personal story, and she prayed with me and encouraged me. She introduced me to fellowship and the local call. It was a very big impact on my life. God started to reveal himself back to me. I knew it was the Spirit of God not giving up on me.
As Salvos focus on the mission of Jesus, we have a wonderful opportunity to connect and show the love of Jesus to new migrants in our local area. The Welcome Project offers ongoing support to anyone who wants to be a welcomer.
I encourage you to come and join, because you can have an impact on somebody in a positive way. Just visit the Welcome Project website to register today.
A practical way that we can extend love and acceptance to people that are new. It's a hand of hope and a hand of friendship we can extend to welcoming people who may not have much support in our nation. The book of Romans has a scripture from chapter 15 verse 7 that says, "Therefore welcome one another as Christ has welcomed you for the glory of God." We all want to feel welcome. We all want to feel part of something. We all want to be included and belong. God spells out for us how we are to show love, acceptance, and hospitality to those around us. We're going to sing a song in a moment that's called Proof of Your Love. And it says, "Let my life be the proof of your love." We sang it earlier this year when I spoke about the love chapter of the book of Corinthians and how we can do good things and have great gifts, but if we don't have love, then it is useless. I pray that our encounters with people from foreign lands are filled with love, not just good deeds to try and please God or earn us a place in heaven, but a genuine expression of the love that we've received from God, that we would want to share that with others. Other people that have different backgrounds to us, different languages, different circumstances, but still wanting to experience the same love and acceptance that we all crave. We all want that love for us. We've all been accepted by God, and he's asking us to share that with others. So may this be a time of prayer, of seeking, what is it that God's asking you to do? How can you be more loving and accepting to people from other countries as we sing this song?